Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz. Along with me as usual, wrestling insider Tom Colohue. And this is our last episode of 2019. And Tom, it's crazy to think that we're already, the next time we'll be together, it'll be the year 2020 already.
Absolutely. It's been a crazy couple of months, I've got to say. I still remember the first time you came to me with your Kentucky wrestling report, and we did a big cover of, I think it was it Super Showdown in Australia we did a full rundown of?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, good times, man, good times. And now, here we are. It's been a whirlwind few months.
It definitely has, and we're going to talk a little bit about how kind of this podcast came to be and kind of the road that me and Tom have been down really the past 2 years or so, off and on together. But first, we're going to talk wrestling as we always do, and we're going to start today with a little bit of NXT versus AEW discussion. Of course, Wednesday night was Christmas, and AEW was on the air, and looking at the ratings, I haven't seen the numbers for this past Wednesday show. We're here recording on Thursday evening. I haven't seen the numbers yet, but it's suffice to say that really since Survivor Series, NXT has held a controllable lead on the ratings for the most part. There's been some weeks, of course, the week that they tied, and then, there's been some close weeks, but for the most part, really since Survivor Series weekend, I would say most people would agree that NXT is kind of held control over the Wednesday night war as it was. What do you see heading into 2020? How do you see this, shaking out between NXT and AEW? Do you think that we'll get more of the same? Do you think that the numbers, obviously AEW hopes that the numbers maybe start to get a little bit closer in comparison, but how do you see this kind of shaking out as we head into the new year?
Well, AEW came in on a real wave of momentum. They looked like they were doing great things. And I've said on Twitter, I've said in here, we needed 3 to 6 months to really start to see where they were. Well, we're 3 months in now, we're starting to see the lay of the land, and they're starting to sort of even out a little bit in their rating. NXT, meanwhile, had a long losing streak for that rating battle. They pitched the Wednesday Night Wars, and they were losing it. But as they themselves said, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and they've been able to call on what can only be described as superior resources. When you look at how they used talent for Survivor Series, Raw and SmackDown talent coming into NXT, you look at NXT UK talent coming over, Finn Balor moving over, they threw whatever needed to be thrown at the wall and it started to work. AEW have a problem here because, and this isn't based on one show or anything, it's based on looking at the trends of the numbers. Their retention rates are much weaker than NXT's. Which means that when people are tuning into AEW, they're not tuning back in all the time. Meanwhile, with NXT, you're getting very consistent viewership, very consistent numbers. So we'll see what happens in the new year. I think at this point, AEW, if they hadn't pitched themselves coming in as we're going to be these competitors to the WWE, we're going to be this, we're going to be that, if they hadn't done that, I think I, for one, would be absolutely singing their praises right now. They've done great in a very short space of time to achieve the ratings that they have with the talent that they have. A brand new company has come. It has rivaled NXT. But let's not forget, they came in saying that they were going to be the competitor to the WWE, and right now they are losing against the third most popular brand.
A lot of people, when you hear them discuss, the Monday Night Wars back in the day, a lot of people talk about that. You got huge numbers, but in essence, it was really the same number of wrestling fans who were just switching back and forth, and just the way that the TV companies and the Nielsen ratings work, that a lot of times there was duplicates and rollovers, and so you got these huge numbers, but really it wasn't that, for example, 10 million people were watching wrestling. It was really the same 5 million who were switching back and forth between the two programs. And we saw a little bit of that, like the week that NXT and AEW tied. A lot of people kind of made those same conclusions that, well, it's the same number of wrestling fans. They're just flipping back and forth, and a lot of that is just carryover and rollover between the two. And we saw NXT use a strategy last week where their championship matches, the women's championship and the NXT championship matches, they didn't have commercial breaks. They were commercial free during those two matches. And I would say that a lot of people would come to the conclusion that that was used to keep the people that were tuning into NXT from changing over to AEW during the breaks. They kept those 2 matches were commercial free, and so it kept those viewership, and we saw that NXT won that week and pretty handedly. Do you think that this is like the Monday Night Wars, where we really have the same niche group of wrestling fans who are just tuning into both shows, and NXT is just holding some of them for longer? Or do you think there's a group up there that watch only AEW and that's where their ratings are coming from, and there's just a larger number of people that are watching just NXT?
I think we've got a very rabid AEW fan base who would tell you that they only watch AEW. There are definitely some people like that. However, I think a large portion of the audience, and NXT and AEW really compete for the same audience. It's a very different audience to what Raw and SmackDown look for. It's a wrestling purist. It's a people who want good wrestling over good characters. You know, rather than having in-depth storylines and multi-layers where the wrestling is actually secondary, they want the wrestling front and center. So it is really the same crowd they're looking for. That limits the amount of growth they can do. But it's very telling that we don't have those ad-free matches on Raw or on SmackDown. I think that's definitely to compete and hold that viewership. I think it's been very successful. And I don't think we can compare this to the Monday Night Wars. That was flagship program, peak viewership against flagship program, peak viewership. We're not comparing SmackDown versus Thunder. Right now, this is a completely different target audience to the WWE proper, as it were, Raw and SmackDown. And that's the viewership. And yes, the retention figures, from what I can tell, are better for NXT. That does bear out in the numbers. However, when you look at what's happening with Survivor Series, that is NXT trying to pitch to the same casual audience that Raw and SmackDown have. That's why you're getting pushes for Rhea Ripley, who really started the big push at Survivor Series, for Keith Lee, who really started the big push at Survivor Series. That's them trying to say, oh, did you like that guy at Survivor Series? Well, here he is. He's getting pushed. You've tuned in. Let's keep you. So NXT will add casual viewers over time. I don't see a big change in the product to keep hold of them completely, but there will be subtle changes to endear the product more to casual viewers. AEW have said that they will not do that. I think that is to their credit. They are sticking to their word, and they should accept that their viewership long term may not match NXT. It's still an achievement. It should still be celebrated by their fans. It worries me how many AEW fans and NXT fans are becoming sort of tribal, in that they only want the success of their own brand to the detriment of the other. They need AEW to beat NXT in order to support it. No, if AEW starts only getting 200,000 viewers, keep watching it. It'll still be good quality. It'll still be worth watching.
Not to take anything away from what AEW has done, but how much, kind of on a number scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think that there is any panic in AEW right now? Or maybe better to say, if the numbers are staying the same 6 months from now, do you think there'll be any panic in AEW, or may we see a shift in their product when the thought is, you know, you brought up an interesting point about flagship programming. This is AEW's flagship show. Obviously, it's the only show that they have, but it's their flagship, and the numbers are coming out that they cannot even get more viewers than the WWE's third brand. So do you think that if we see a similar pattern 6 months down the road, how much on a panic meter do you think that AEW would be in, and do you think that that would cause them to maybe shift their philosophy away from what we see now to, hey, we've got to do something to pull in that casual fan if we're going to compete and stay relevant?
It's hard to say. It depends who you mean when you say AEW. The whole Wednesday Night War is really a Cody Rhodes Young Bucks sort of elite invention. That was their marketing plan, as it were, and it's been extremely effective. They've drawn in viewers by pitching themselves as the alternative to WWE and saying to those viewers, we can win, we can change this, we can change that, we can change the landscape. In the initial rally they said men and women will have equal pay. They walked that back. They've talked about insurance and so on and so forth. And I'm yet to see that, but obviously I'm not internal. When it comes to that marketing plan, they will be disappointed. They will be panicking. However, when you talk about Tony Khan, who's in charge and investing, and when you talk about TNT, they are very happy with those numbers. They are very happy with the product they're putting out, the money that they're spending, and the income that they are getting from it. All of that works out brilliantly. They are happy. However, they are not booking the shows. As I say, AEW have pledged not to be reactive and not to be in that way, but I look at that Dark Order segment, and to me that feels like a concession that Baszler and Rhea Ripley is going to be the match that people are watching, so let's do something else. Let's not line up Jericho and Moxley against them, even though you could. Let's not line up MJF and Cody Rhodes against them, even though you could. To me, that felt like they weren't trying to compete.
Last thing before we move on to other topics, you had a very interesting article up on Sportskeeda.com this week about your reporting that there would be a potential superstar shakeup in April, around or maybe after WrestleMania time, and that some very interesting names, big names, could potentially end up over on the NXT roster full time. Do you see this as a strategy of the WWE basically doubling down on NXT to say, hey, we're in the lead now, and so we're not going to rest on our laurels. We're going to destroy, this AEW competition right from the get-go and get some of these big names on NXT to join some of these upstarts like a Keith Lee and a Rhea Ripley that really took off, at Survivor Series? Or do you think that the shakeup won't necessarily, we're not going to necessarily see Roman Reigns be drafted over to NXT, but more of just a way to add some depth to the NXT roster itself and the NXT show on USA?
I spoke to Triple H right after NXT UK takeover in Cardiff, so back in August, and I asked him about the developmental brand moniker, and is bringing NXT to USA the next step in that? Is NXT still considered developmental? And what he said to me is, for a long time, to him at least, it's not been developmental. Because you look at some of the talents that have come through, you could say Braun Strowman was a developmental talent for a long time. He never really wrestled in NXT. You look at Charlotte Flair as another example. He listed a number of names who came through that developmental system, but even when they were wrestling on NXT, they weren't considered developmental. As regards the idea that they are doubling down to destroy the competition, no, that they are trying to achieve parity here. I'm not going to say they're not looking to destroy the competition at the same time, but their primary goal is to achieve that parity from NXT to Raw and to SmackDown, so they are all on an equal footing. There is a real rivalry going on between the executive directors right now. There's been Paul Heyman, Bruce Pritchard, and even though I believe his title's different, Triple H. They want to oversee the best possible show. It's not all Vince McMahon coming in and saying, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. He's less involved now than he has been for a long time. Obviously, he wasn't at TLC. He's not been there at every show this year as he has been previously. When it comes to who we're going to get, I definitely don't see a Roman Reigns figure going. It's been said to me that changes will be keeping in the spirit of NXT. I think it'll be that underground feeling. I think we're looking more at, for example, a Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn would be a perfect figure to come back to NXT for a year or so. Nakamura, perfect example of someone who could come back to NXT for a little while. You look at some of the women. Ruby Riott could really help NXT, given what she's been able to do on Raw and on SmackDown in quite a brief time for her. She was the secondary heel on both shows, and when at one point Ronda Rousey was the top heel, that's a good place to be as a secondary heel. So she could really help lift NXT and give it that parity with her skill and her familiarity with the casual audience. You mentioned Keith Lee. I think he's someone who could be moved to a Raw, to a SmackDown. But a shake-up like this gives them the chance to take someone. Let's take the example of Shayna Baszler. Take her from NXT, put her on Raw for a year, give her the championship, give her the title, give her the Royal Rumble win, have her beat Becky at WrestleMania, give her the title. The next year by WrestleMania, she's not the champion anymore. You move her back to NXT. How many viewers does she bring with her? Now, there are people, Tommaso Ciampa is probably the most famous one at this part, who have been quoted as saying they will never go to Raw and to SmackDown. That is fair enough. However, I've also reported in the past that many members of the Raw and SmackDown roster have spoken with Triple H and have spoken with Vince McMahon, and they are keeping a short list of people who want or have said at some point to go back to NXT. Asuka is one of those people. You see people appearing at NXT UK. Finn Balor was one. He's in NXT now. Cesaro, another one. There are a lot of people who could really enjoy that move and potentially the reduced dates that come with it. Essentially, it could be a year with limited dates. That could be incredibly beneficial for them. It could be very beneficial for the people who go to Raw and to SmackDown. It could be beneficial to the viewers as well. Everybody wins, except unfortunately maybe AEW.
Let's shift gears a little bit here. As we mentioned at the top, this will be our last episode of 2019, so we thought it'd be fun to kind of go back and look at the year in wrestling and pick out some of our of the year awards, our match of the year, our storyline of the year, and our superstar of the year. Both of Tom and I's picks for those awards. And so we'll start with match of the year for 2019. For me, the work rate I feel like right now in wrestling is so high that it would be hard to pick a match just strictly based on what match had the best work or what match had the best moves. There's so much talent spread out all across the country in AEW, WWE, New Japan, etc. that I don't. For me, that was too hard of a criteria to just set it at work rate. So for me, match of the year, big time matches are matches that make me feel something. Wrestling to me is about feeling and experience and an emotional experience and wanting one guy to win or wanting one guy to lose. And so for me, my pick for match of the year was Daniel Bryan versus Kofi Kingston at WrestleMania. Just for seeing Kofi achieve the pinnacle, becoming WWE champion, knowing the mountains that he's had to climb to get there, knowing the fact that he probably wasn't even supposed to be in that spot. It felt very organic. It felt very real in that moment. And so that, to me, stuck out as the match of the year. On top of the fact that if you want to look at work rate and moves, those two had a great match at WrestleMania just on a strictly performance criteria or, work rate criteria. But I thought the feeling that was behind that match and that moment really made it stick out to me. So for me, that was my pick for match of the year in 2019. What about you?
Well, I think that first and foremost is a great pick. That was definitely one of the ones I was considering. And if not for you picking it, I may have picked it myself. Like you say, it was a tremendous match. It was a tremendous story. It was so organic. And it led to a really strong title reign for Kofi, which unfortunately ended as it did. I had a couple of thoughts on this one. One of my first ones that I wanted to mention, sort of an honourable mention, was Rollins versus Styles at Money in the Bank, which I think has been overlooked since. It was a tremendous match. Another one I really enjoyed is Rollins versus Lesnar at SummerSlam. Nobody gave Rollins a chance, but he managed, even when he was getting booed as he came out, because this was sort of the height of his Twitter unpopularity, he managed to convince everyone in that arena by the end of it that he was the man, as it were, and he really made it happen. My pick, however, is going to be a Hell in a Cell match. It's not going to be the Rollins Hell in a Cell match, because we both know how that went. For me, match of the year is going to be Becky Lynch against Sasha Banks in Hell in a Cell. Crazy innovation. Real hardcore work rate. Two of the best in the business. I was convinced that Sasha Banks was going to win, and she did not. That match had me on the edge of my seat the entire way. I absolutely loved it.
Don't think you can go wrong with any pick there of those that you mentioned. So, and again, I think it just speaks to the strength of the year that we've had, just from a technical standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint. It's really hard to just pick just one or put your thumb on just one match that truly sticks out as match of the year, because there's been, so many that could fit in that category.
Absolutely. This has been a great year for in-ring performances. The WWE over the last few years have really started to catch up. A lot of that has been people from NXT coming through, but this decade has been a real work rate decade. And if we get people like Johnny Gargano joining the roster soon, maybe a Velveteen Dream, we're going to have so much really interesting and intricate matches. But then you've still got characters like Aleister Black and Bray Wyatt at the height of his powers now. So you've still got the character workers who do so much good. It can only get better from here, which is great considering how good we have it.
Let's move to storyline of the year. This one for me was a little bit more difficult. And I have to say, and this is probably going to make me sound old and show my age a little bit here, but, you know, maybe it's nostalgia, but, you know, I kind of long for the days back in, you know, like the early to mid 90s, you know, kind of, I guess, maybe at the start or maybe even the height of my fandom, you know, as a child. I could even go back now and tell you, you know, pick an early 90s year, and I could go back and tell you month to month what happened, what were the big angles, what were the storylines, what were the main events of all the major pay-per-views and things. And so the storytelling and the storylines, I think, really stuck out to me a lot more then, where now so much happens. There's a pay-per-view every month. There's so much going on that sometimes it's hard to really find one that stands out because everything just kind of gets mushed together at the end of the year. And so to me, when I kind of started to go back and reflect, and maybe this is a little bit of a cop-out because it kind of piggybacks off of my Match of the Year award, but my storyline of the year was Kofi Mania. And again, just the organic nature of it, the fact that, again, Kofi was kind of just a last-minute replacement for someone else, you know, in a spot, in a match that turned into this movement and this push for him from the fans, from the WWE universe, you know, that the WWE says that they supposedly are going to start listening to. They really pushed him to this point. And I thought it was really poetic that it ended up being Daniel Bryan, the man that he took the title from, considering that Daniel Bryan had basically the same type of thing happen to him just a couple years prior. And then, as you said, it led to a really strong reign for Kofi. I was a little bit saddened to see it end the way that it did, and hopefully maybe he can get back to that spot at some point or another in his career. But so to me, the angle or storyline of the year for me was Kofi Mania and his push up to that title win at WrestleMania. What did you think? What stuck out to you this year from a storytelling point of view?
Well, Kofi Mania was definitely a very strong one. You talk about the poetic justice that was taking the title from Daniel Bryan. From day one, like the beginnings of that storyline, the gauntlet match, Daniel Bryan was in and out of Vince McMahon's office begging to lose the title to Kofi at WrestleMania. He was so far behind his fellow, really wanted to see that happen. And you look at, that was even beyond just winning the title, the brotherhood in that storyline.
Yeah.
The fact that the New Day were working so hard for Kofi. And so many people were saying, oh, this person's going to turn, Big E's going to turn, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. No, those three men are so united and so powerful together. They all had such a victory. You can go back years. You can look at Up, Up, Down, Down's a perfect example of it. All those videos that Xavier Woods does. And there are so many times he mentions he has one career goal left, and that is to see Kofi Kingston as the WWE champion. He's been saying it for years. It was a beautiful moment for everyone. However, my personal favourite, and it's not a feud, this is very much just a storyline, but it is everything going on with Bray Wyatt. Since I got back into wrestling in 2015, I have been entranced by this man. The whole Firefly concept, walking down to the ring with the lantern swinging, the fact that at the time he looked like a cult leader, but as you learn more about Sister Abigail, is clear as a cult follower. Now he is without guidance. He has created this alternate version of himself. It is just magnificent to watch someone so committed, so invested, and so inventive as well. He's doing great things. And ever since that first Firefly Funhouse, when we saw, oh god, what's the name of the The Vulture. The Buzzard.
Mercy.
Mercy, thank you. When we first saw Mercy come out of the box, just for half a minute, and then they never mentioned it for the rest of the night, it caught your eye, caught your attention. And then when Bray Wyatt stands there and says the word of the day is sociopath, SOCIOPATH, I was hooked. I wanted more. It's a shame it has a shelf life, but they're managing to keep it going. They're managing to keep it interesting. Let's see where it goes next.
Our last category we're going to talk about is Superstar of the Year. And to me, this came down to kind of a 4-horse race in this one. And I'll kind of briefly just kind of go down my final 4. I thought Roman Reigns was in my contention just for the fact of obviously his health situation, coming back from cancer and doing what he's done and performing at the level that he has. I thought he was obviously someone who should be in the running. Seth Rollins, just for his sheer work rate this year, the big time matches he's been in, being the Monster Slayer and the WWE the championship win, and just kind of the way that he carried the Raw brand for the majority of the year. Becky Lynch was in my running. Can't deny what she has done this year, what she's meant to the women's division, what she's meant to wrestling, and the way that she has gotten herself over and really launched herself into a new stratosphere in her career. But my number 1 and my Superstar of the Year, you kind of laid the groundwork for it right there, talking about the storyline of the year. My Superstar of the Year was Bray Wyatt. Just the way that he has come into this year, the way that they started that lead up for him and for this character, as you mentioned, starting off with just the buzzard in the box and then leading all the way up through the Funhouse until current day, to where really now we have 2 characters. We have Bray Wyatt and we have The Fiend on SmackDown being the champion. Just the meteoric rise that he's had really just since August, really right around this time that we started doing this podcast, a little bit prior to SummerSlam. That's when The Fiend debuted, and then since then, he's been unstoppable. He's been put over about as strong as you could put anyone over, putting the Universal Championship on him, and I'm really interested to see where they go from here, leading into the Royal Rumble, and then especially up until WrestleMania, to see if someone eventually dethrones this monster, The Fiend, Bray Wyatt. So for his creativity, for his character work, and just the way that he's been presented, he earned my Superstar of the Year award. What about you?
I think Wyatt's a very good call. I think he's got a lot of story left to tell. It's going to be very interesting once someone finally gets the mask off and we really explore the duality. It's very much a Batman thing right now, which is always going to have my interest. You mentioned really good names. Roman Reigns has had an incredible year since he came back. He's been sort of pleasantly in the background, but still in a leadership role, which really suits him well. I would give a shout out to Baron Corbin, who's done at least very interesting things this year, considering where he was at the start of the year. He's dethroned and retired Kurt Angle. He's won the King of the Ring. He's had this feud now with Roman, and in some parts looked good, in some parts looked ridiculous, but we are where we are. You mentioned Seth Rollins, who I have mentioned as Superstar of the Decade, and I still stand by that. When it comes to Superstar of the Year, this is one where I have to once again go back to Triple H saying that NXT would have parity. My Superstar of the Year is Rhea Ripley. From an almost standing start, she has had a meteoric rise, and because she's on NXT, she can get away with a Roman Reigns style push. She can be pushed so heavily that if she was on Raw or SmackDown, she'd be getting booed already. Her title win would be getting boos. But she's on NXT, people are willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. She's able to win a War Games match, 2 against 4. She's able to win a Survivor Series match. People are willing to overlook the heelish tendencies. She walked into NXT after a very successful run in NXT UK. She took over. She dominated. And let's not forget everything she did in the Royal Rumble as well. 4 eliminations, just a hugely compelling character. Pins over Charlotte, Sasha. She looked very good against Becky in their brief interaction on NXT. There'll be more to come, but for me, Rhea Ripley has definitely taken off in huge ways this year. She's my Superstar of the Year.
Yeah, and I think that's a good pick, and as you kind of mentioned, I don't think we've really seen her pinnacle yet. I think, you know, she just now has kind of achieved that top dog status over on NXT, and I think once she eventually does get to SmackDown or Raw, which we all know that she eventually will, I think she'll hit even another gear and another higher gear to her career, and she may be a likely candidate and for this award next year.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd say so. We'll have to wait and see what comes next, but she's definitely a candidate.
Well, we hope that everyone listening has enjoyed the year 2019 in wrestling as much as we have, and we all look forward to what's ahead in 2020. And we do want to take a minute here, you know, as we get into the holiday season and the new year. Obviously, a lot of time is taken to reflect and be reflective of the past year. And so we want to thank everybody that has ever listened to this podcast and continues to listen and view us on YouTube. We want to appreciate you guys for tuning in. You know, we posted our first show back in August and just kind of had a germ of an idea to do this podcast in conjunction with Sportskeeda and pitched this idea to them to do a podcast with Tom and I. I actually met or got in contact with Tom about 2 years ago. I started a homegrown podcast, if you want to call it that, and was looking for some guests. And Tom was a guy that I followed on Twitter. He was doing some work for the Pro Wrestling Torch, and I saw that he was on Twitter a lot. He was very interactive with his followers, people that asked him questions and things, and his reports were usually right. They were correct. They were factual, and things that he said usually came to pass. And so just on a whim, I sent him an email asking him if he would be willing to come on this podcast that had only been in existence for a couple of weeks at the time, and surprisingly, he said yes. And he came on and did a show with me. As he mentioned, I think our first show together, we ran down and did a review of the Superstars Showdown and talked about that. And then he appeared on my podcast various times after that. That show actually got picked up by another wrestling website for a while. And then when I went to work for Sportskeeda, I approached them and pitched them an idea and said, hey, you know, Tom Colohue is someone that I have a relationship and a existing relationship with. He's great at what he does. I think he's one of the top news reporters in wrestling, and I think he would be a great guy to have and do a podcast with, and have a weekly podcast and have him share some news and rumors and things. And hopefully I could be there to try to make it entertaining and give him the questions, and then let him just do his thing. And Sportskeeda approved it and went with it and gave us a trial period to kind of see how it went. And thanks to you guys and girls that listen at home, we did very good numbers on YouTube. We did numbers that were higher than I think the Sportskeeda execs were expecting, and so we got the green light to do this podcast every week. And so here we are. We're getting ready to close out 2019 and enter 2020. So for about 6 months we've been doing this, and we have no plans of stopping. We plan to continue to be here every week with Tom, and we've also had various guests. Obviously, Gary Cassidy's been on with me in the past before, and filled in even for me on times where I couldn't quite make it on certain weeks. And so I just want to say, from a personal standpoint, I want to take this time to thank Sportskeeda for allowing us to do this, and thank Tom for being so gracious to do this podcast with me, to always be giving of his time and being willing to kind of let me ride his coattails here and do this podcast. And it's been a great 2019, and I'm looking forward to 2020.
I always like how you say that, ride coattails. You're not doing that at no point. I do remember the initial contact. There was a phase whereby I was looking for a few more podcasts. I was looking to try and get the name out there more, which not many people know this. I don't really explain it much. But about 3 years ago, I sat down and I thought to myself, I want to start writing about wrestling. I had 62 followers on Twitter. No one had ever heard of the name Tom Colohue. No one. I approached PW Torch after being turned down by a couple of others, and Wade Keller gave me the shot. So when someone reaches out to me, it doesn't matter how many followers you have, it doesn't matter what you're looking to do, I'm more than happy to give you the time of day, because I've been that guy. I've been there. And I still don't think of myself as anything particularly big. So when you say riding the coattails, I don't know what coattails you're talking about, because I ain't got none, mate. I ain't got none. I do want to say, of course, thank you to you reaching out. I always really enjoyed working with you because you have such a depth to your questions. Admittedly, you ask like 5 or 6 questions in one.
I do.
But I think that's just because your questions are so intricate and they're linked in with so many things. And I know you a little bit. So once you start talking, you also start thinking. That's one of the things I like so much. Because once you start to talk about it, so many different avenues and routes start to pop up. And we're the same like that. There's so many different options when you start talking about wrestling that you want to explore. That's what we like to do here. We like to explore those different things. That's why when it was your idea, obviously, the podcast for Sportskeeda, but I was always interested, and I want to express a personal thank you to you for sort of dragging me into this a little bit and dragging the knowledge out of me, what I have managed to pick up over the few years that I've been doing this. I am ending this year, the end of my 3-year plan, in a very good place, and it's a large part of that is the people I've met and the people who are listening to this and people like yourself who I really enjoy working with. And when I joined SK, I didn't want to work here without people like you. You know, people of your talent, people of your interest, people of your curiosity, people who loved wrestling and people who love to talk. Because I love wrestling and I love to talk. So thank you for being my host throughout all of this.
Well, absolutely. Like I said, the pleasure's all mine, and like I said, we appreciate both of us. Sportskeeda, they have a great team over there. We hope that you guys are checking out sportskeeda.com on the daily and checking out guys like Tom and checking out the stuff that they've got over on the website. And full disclosure, I probably wouldn't be working for Sportskeeda if it wasn't for Tom kind of putting the lead out there for me and kind of going to bat for me and putting his name, his stamp, of approval on my name. And so, again, I owe a lot to him. He's got some gracious things to say about me, but like I said, everything as far as this podcast goes wouldn't be possible without him and without Sportskeeda. So we both say thank you to them. Again, we thank everyone for listening. Anyone that has ever checked us out on YouTube, we thank you so much. We ask hopefully that you'll continue and stick with us in 2020. Continue to check us out, like our videos, post comments, send feedback, share it with your fellow wrestling fans and friends. And we plan to be here, like I said, every week moving forward, bringing you all the latest news and rumors and reports in wrestling and doing it with Tom. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at Colohue. If you would like to follow me, I'm at Korey Gunz. Make sure you're following Sportskeeda and Dropkick DiSKussions on Twitter as well. And we will see you guys in the year 2020 on the next episode of Dropkick DiSKussions.